This is Cost and Management Accounting, an introductory lesson series. My name is Huijun Chen. I'm from the Department of Accounting and Information Systems, College of Management at Asia University. Lesson 4, Activity-Based Costing, or ABC. Learning objective number 1, understand the basic approach in activity-based costing and how it differs from conventional costing in assigning overhead costs to products. When cost systems were developed in the 1800s, the emphasis was on simplicity because cost and activity data had to be collected by hand, and all calculations were done with paper and pencil. Most companies produced a limited variety of similar products, so there was little difference in the overhead costs consumed by each product. Simplicity is the major concern for assigning overhead costs to products at the time. A plant-wide overhead rate is a single overhead rate that is used throughout an entire factory. Direct labor has often been used as the allocation base for overhead because direct labor information was already being recorded. Direct labor was a large component of product costs. Managers believe direct labor and overhead costs were highly correlated. However, a plant-wide overhead rate has its disadvantages. Today, direct labor may no longer be a satisfactory base for allocation of overhead because most companies sell a large variety of products that consume different amounts of overhead. As a percentage of total cost, direct labor has been declining and overhead has been increasing. Many of these growing overhead costs may not be correlated with direct labor. Technology advancements have reduced the cost and complexity of gathering diverse sources of data. Nowadays, many companies have a system in which each department has its own overhead rate. For example, machine hours for machining department, labor hours for assembly department, and labor hours for shipping department. Departmental overhead rates also have their disadvantages. Departmental rates will not correctly assign overhead in situations where a company has a range of products and complex overhead costs. The departmental approach relies on a single measure of activity as the allocation base, while some overhead costs may be caused by factors that are not directly proportional to the volume of production. To solve these problems, activity-based costing is used to account for these other factors and more accurately assigns overhead costs to products. What is activity-based costing? Activity-based costing, or what we call the ABC, is a method for allocating overhead costs to products or services based on the specific activities that drive those costs. It aims to provide a more accurate understanding of the true cost of producing each product or service by identifying and tracking the activities that contribute to those costs. Key concepts of activity-based costing include activities, cost pools, cost drivers, and cost allocation. ABC focuses on identifying the specific activities within a company that contribute to overhead costs. These activities can include things like machine setup, quality control, customer service, or marketing. Costs associated with each activity are grouped into cost pools. Each cost pool is linked to a cost driver, which is a factor that causes the cost in that pool to change. Examples of cost drivers include machine hours, labor hours, number of setup, or number of customer orders. Costs from each cost pool are then allocated to products or services based on their consumption of the relevant cost driver. This is an activity-based costing model. Cost objects can be products and customers or services. Activity required for making the products or providing the services need to be identified. For example, for clothing making companies, scheduling for production, sewing, inspection, and shipping are activities. These activities will consume resources, which then incur costs. An activity is an event that causes the consumption of overhead resources. For example, setting up machines, admitting hospital patients, billing customers, or opening a bank account. They all require the consumption of resources. Pools, measures, rates are important for activity-based costing. An activity cost pool is a cost bucket in which costs related to a particular activity are accumulated. An activity measure expresses how much of the activity is carried out and is used as the allocation base for applying overhead cost. The activity rate is a predetermined overhead rate for each activity cost pool. The challenge for designing an activity-based costing system is to select a reasonably small number of activities that explain the bulk of the variation in overhead costs. But how are activities chosen? We can interview a broad range of managers to find out what activities they think consume most of the organization's resources. An important step for designing the system is to combine activities. Related activities are frequently combined to reduce the amount of detail and record-keeping costs. For example, several actions may be involved in handling and moving raw materials, but these may be combined into a single activity titled material handling. An activity dictionary defines each of the activities that will be included in the activity-based costing system and how the activities will be measured. In addition to combining activities, activities can be classified into 4 categories, or what we call the hierarchy of activities. The first one is unit-level activities. They are performed each time a unit is produced. The cost of unit-level activities should be proportional to the number of units produced, such as direct labor and direct material. Batch-level activities are costs incurred every time a group or a batch of units is produced or a series of steps is performed, such as machine setup for production. Product-level activities are those activities that support an entire product line, but not necessarily each individual unit, such as advertising campaign. Facility-level activities are those activities that support the entire company, but not necessarily each individual product line, such as general factory administration. Here are more examples for hierarchy of activities. Unit-level activities. The cost of direct materials, direct labor, and machine maintenance are examples of unit-level activities. Batch-level activities, such as setting up equipment for a production run, performing quality control inspections on a batch of products, and processing purchase orders for a batch of raw materials. They are all examples of batch-level activities. Product-level activities, such as designing new products, advertising existing products, and maintaining a product website, are examples of product line activities. Renting or leasing a facility, maintaining a facility's grounds and equipment, and providing security for facility are examples of facility-level activities. Here are examples of activities and measures matching together. Under unit level, for the activity of processing units on machines, the activity measure would be machine hours. Under batch level, for the activity of processing production orders, the activity measure should be production orders processed. Under product level, for the activity of maintaining inventories of parts, the activity measure could be hours of design time. Under the facility level, for the activity of general factory administration, the activity measure can be direct labor hours. Let's do concept check number 1. Which of the following statements is false? You may select more than one answer. A. In recent years, most companies have experienced increasing manufacturing overhead costs in relation to direct labor costs. B. Batch labor costs do not depend on the number of units produced in a batch. C. Facility labor costs are not caused by particular products. D. Product labor costs are larger for high-volume products than for low-volume products. What is the answer? B is false, because product labor costs are unrelated to the amount of a product that is made. Concept check number 2. Which of the following statements is true? You may select more than one answer. A. The costs of a unit level activity should be proportional to the number of units produced. B. Unit level activities are performed each time a unit is produced. C. Setting up equipment is an example of a unit level activity. D. Activity-based costing system may use direct labor hours and/or machine hours to assign unit labor costs to products. What is your answer? Only C is not true. If you change the unit into batch, then C will be correct. Setting up equipment is an example of a batch level activity. Let's do an example for using ABC together. Here are the questions. Harry's company makes two products, GPS systems and phone systems. The company has been losing bids to supply GPS systems to lower-priced competitors. The company has been winning all bids to supply phone systems. For the current year, the company has budgeted sales of 50,000 phone units and 200,000 GPS units. The company's traditional cost system applies manufacturing overhead to products based on direct labor hours. Both products require 2 direct labor hours to complete. So, for phone, if 50,000 units were produced, times 2 hours per unit, so 100,000 hours will be required. For GPS, 200,000 units times 2 hours per unit, then 400,000 hours were required. So total direct labor hours for making these two products would be 500,000 hours. Unit costs for materials and labor are as follows. For direct materials, 90 for phone, 50 for GPS. For direct labor, 20 for phone, also 20 for GPS. If the predetermined overhead rate based upon direct labor hours is 10 per direct labor hour, what are the total estimated manufacturing overhead costs for the current year? The total estimated manufacturing overhead cost will be $5 million. You take 500,000 direct labor hours times 10 per direct labor hour. So the answer will be $5 million. Since each product requires 2 hours of direct labor, $40 of overhead is assigned to each product. You take 2 direct labor hours times 20 per direct labor hours for both phone and GPS. So 40 here and 40 here as well. Learning objective number 2 is to compute activity rates for an activity-based costing system. The ABC project team at Harris has developed the following basic information to compute activity rate. The first column is activity and activity measures. The second column is the estimated overhead cost. The third column is the expected activity for both phone and GPS. Please remember this is the activities, and this is the total cost, and this is how the activity is measured. We can then calculate an activity rate for each of the 6 activities listed here by dividing the estimated overhead for an activity by the total expected activity. Let's take labor-related activity as an example. For this activity, direct labor hours is the activity measure. The total estimated cost is $800. So you take $800 divided by the 500,000 direct labor hours, you will get 1.6 per direct labor hour. That is the activity rate. So for machine hours is 2.10. For setup is 400 per time. And per order is 2625, per part type is 500, and per machine hour is $2. Based upon the activity rates calculated in the previous slide, we now can compute the overhead cost per unit for phones. Here is the activity and activity measures. Here is expected activity, and this one is activity rate. Based upon this information, you can get a total overhead cost assigned for phones, that is $90,000. As there will be 50,000 units be produced, so the overhead cost per unit is 97.80 for phones. You can see the activity rate for production orders is the highest within the 6 activities. The expected activity rate for this production order is as high as 2625, so the more units ordered, the lower the unit cost assigned. This one is to compute overhead cost per unit for GPS units. The same format as previous slide. There are 6 activities. You take expected activity times the activity rate and do it 6 times. You will get the amount assigned to GPS. So the total overhead cost assigned is $5,110,000. Because there will be 200,000 units will be produced, so the overhead cost per unit for GPS is 25.55. Learning objective number 3 is to compute product cost using activity-based costing. Here is the result provided by activity-based costing, which uses a multi-predetermined overhead rate to assign manufacturing overhead. And this is the result provided by the traditional direct labor costing method, which uses only single predetermined overhead, and that is direct labor hours. Okay, and this is a direct material, this is direct labor, and this is manufacturing overhead assigned. You will get the unit product cost here. Okay, you can see that the unit product cost of a GPS unit decreases from 110 to 95.55 from here to here. This is a traditional way. This is the ABC. Okay, while the unit cost of a phone unit increased from 150 to 207.80 here to here, and this is traditional and this is activity-based costing. What makes the big difference? To answer that question, we will move to learning objective number 4 to compare the product cost computed under activity-based costing and conventional costing methods. From the numbers here, we can see that the ABC system assigns 14.45 less overhead than the traditional system to each GPS unit. You take 40 minus 25.55, you will get 14.45. Although in the past, the team at Harris thought their competitors were pricing below their cost on GPS, it turns out that Harris was overcharging for GPS because their costs were overstated by this number. You can also see from here, this is 40 under direct labor costing method, and this is 97.80 under activity-based costing for manufacturing overhead. The ABC system assigns 57.80 more overhead than the traditional system to each phone unit. You take 97.80 minus 40, you will get this number. In the past, the company has been charging 40 in overhead cost to a unit of either product here, 40 and 40. However, it should have been charging 97.8 for each phone and only 25.55 to each GPS. Thus, unit costs have been badly distorted because of the use of direct labor hours as the allocation base here and here. The pattern of cost distortion shown in the previous slides is quite common. Such distortion can happen in any company that relies on direct labor hours or machine hours in assigning overhead costs to products. The key reason is that other significant causes of overhead costs has been ignored. Let's see the cost distortion of cost shifting from high to low volume products. For phone unit under direct labor costing, the unit product cost is 150, and under activity-based costing for phone unit, the unit cost will be 207.80. When a company implements activity-based costing, overhead cost shifts from high volume to low volume products, with a higher unit product cost resulting for the low volume products from here to here. We can see that the unit cost for the phone increased from 150 to 207.8 here to here. This increase was resulting from batch level and product level cost, which shift from the high volume product to the low volume product. For example, consider the cost of issuing a production orders we just mentioned previously, which is a batch level activity. The average cost to Harris to issue a single production order is 2625. That's very expensive. As shown in slide number 29, you can go back to see. This cost is assigned to a production order, regardless of how many units are processed in that order. The key here is to realize that fewer phones are processed per production order than the GPS. Let's see another example for the cost shifting of overhead cost. The traditional system assigns the same amount of all overhead costs to each phone or GPS unit. You can see here 40, 40 for both different products. This practice is not reasonable because each product consumes different resources provided by different activities. For example, product labor costs are fixed with respect to the number of units processed. The average cost per unit of an activity such as part administration, as shown on slide number 29, will be higher for low volume than for high volume products. So, in this case, the high volume GPS will be allocated less overhead and unit cost will be reduced. The ABC system assigns different amounts of production order-related overhead costs to each product. This fact can be illustrated in a two-step process. The first step is to compute the number of units processed per production order for each product, like this. The number of units produced per year for phone is 50,000, for GPS is 200,000. Number of production orders issued per year for phone is 800, for GPS is 400. So the number of units processed per production order would be 62.5 for phone and 500 for GPS. The second step is to compute production order cost per unit for each product. The cost to issue a production order is 2625. 2625 for the two products. We can have this number in previous slide. The average number of units processed per production order is 62.5 for phone, 500 for GPS, again from the previous slide. So the production order cost per unit would be 42 for phone and 5.25 for GPS. That is a big difference. So the costs are being shifted from the high volume GPS systems to the low volume phone systems. Concept check number 3. Which of the following explain why ABC improves product cost accuracy when compared to traditional methods? There could be more than one answer, okay? A is ABC typically uses more cost pools than traditional methods. B, ABC assigns direct labor costs to products, whereas traditional methods do not. C, ABC often uses a plant-wide overhead allocation, whereas traditional methods do not. D, ABC uses a variety of activity measures to assign overhead costs to products, some of which are correlated with volume and some of which are not. What is your answer? The correct answer is A. ABC typically use more cost pools than traditional methods. That's correct. And D, ABC uses a variety of activity measures to assign overhead costs to products, some of which are correlated with volume and some of which are not. Please be noted that traditional methods assign direct labor costs to products, and they often rely on plant-wide overhead allocation. In addition to providing more accurate cost information, an ABC system can help identify areas where the company can benefit from improving its current processes. So there is a management way, we call it activity-based management, that will be focused on managing activities to eliminate waste and reduce processing time and defects. The first step in any improvement program is deciding what to improve. So you have to identify the activity rates that can be used to target areas where costs seem excessively high, like the production order cost we see in Harris' case. Benchmarking can be used to compare activity cost information with world-class standards of performance achieved by other organizations. So one is to compare activity rate within a company. The other way is benchmarking with outside the companies. In summary, ABC improves the accuracy of product costing by increasing the number of cost pools used to accumulate overhead costs, using activity cost pools that are more similar or related than departmental cost pools, assigning overhead costs using activity measures that cause those costs, rather than relying solely on direct labor hours or machine hours. Activity-based costing also highlights activities that could benefit most from process improvement efforts. When is the good time to use an ABC? Cost of implementing an ABC system may outweigh the benefits. However, the benefits are more likely to be worth the cost when products differ substantially in volume, batch, size, and in activities required. Conditions have changed substantially since the existing cost system was established. Overhead costs are high and increasing, and no one seems to understand why. The last one is management does not trust the existing cost system, and it ignores data from it when making decisions. When those conditions met, it's a very good time to use an ABC model. One last thing to mention about when to use ABC model. When the assumption the cost in each activity pool is strictly proportional to its activity measures is violated. For example, managers should be particularly alert to product costs that contain allocated facility level costs. Concept check number 4. Which of the following statements is false? A. ABC systems usually shift costs from low-volume products to high-volume products. B. Benchmarking can be used to identify activities with the greatest potential for improvement. C. ABC is most valuable to companies that manufacturing products that are similar in terms of their volume of production, batch size, and complexity. D. ABC systems are based on the assumption that the costs included in each activity cost pool are strictly proportional to the cost pool's activity measure. Answer A. ABC systems usually shift costs from low-volume products to high-volume products is not correct. Number C. ABC is most valuable to companies that manufacture products that are similar in terms of their volume of production, batch size, and complexity is also not right. One last reminder before we close this lesson. The illustrations in this lesson assume that ABC is being used for external reporting purposes. If the system is used for internal decision-making purposes, two important modifications should be made. Number one, Selling and administrative costs should be assigned to products where appropriate. Number 2, facility level costs should be removed from product costs. That's all for the lesson. This is the end of lesson 4. My name is Huijun Chen, and I'm from the Department of Accounting and Information Systems, College of Management at Asian University. I hope to see you soon in lesson 5.